Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you might be, right now you're in the new way. On Steampunk Radio with good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you might be, right now you're in the new way. On Steampunk Radio with two E's, which you can listen to on the TuneIn app or on steampunkradio.com. Or on live stream somewhere in the universe, but we're not live streaming at this point, and so it could be a little difficult. I'm Dr. Lenny Time. I'll be your host, and I've got a real profession. I am a scientist. Ha 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 ha.
Progress, my heart. Tell me, come back home. Stop running in circles. Tails coming.
scientists. I was watching something on the internet this weekend that just threw me into a tizzy about the media portrayal of scientists. And having been a scientist in this lifetime, I know some of the details of what it takes to get that designation of scientist. And it's a lot of work to really be on top of your game to be able to prove something in a science sense. But since I am a little beyond the game that I used to play, I took the science that I knew and tried to apply it to life. And the lifestyle that we lead being a scientist is supposed to be one of making assumptions, doing a test based on the assumptions that were made, and then looking at the results of the test and seeing if all the assumptions were valid. And when you make an assumption in science, you write it down, you look at the condition of what it is, you find out the things that vary with respect to what you're assuming, and you can try and control these variables so that you can know what's going on. And in my science, chemistry, there are 5 different fields of chemistry that each one has a different approach and talks only to its own members and not across the kingdom of chemistry. So you have synthetic chemists who make things, and you have analytical chemists who measure things and look at quantity, and you have physical chemists who measure things and look at qualities, and you have nuclear chemists who make it all up as they go and try and convince people that they've got the most power. And really, they have the biggest dickus, but that's not how it works. If you've got your creds in the field, then you're credible, and other people tend to listen to what you're saying. If you don't have the creds in the field, you don't even get in the door to first base to participate in the argument. And so there's a lot of people who've gone out and gotten their creds just so they could get into an argument with people because they wouldn't be taken seriously if they didn't have the creds. But the creds don't mean nothing if you're going to make it up as you go anyway. And being that this show is a crypto fiction, we're making it up as we go. As the scientist involved in play acting the role of radio talk show host, I make up some stuff because it leads to good entertainment. But when I've got my hat on as the scientist in the room, I don't make it up. I shoot from the hip. But there's a lot of people in places like YouTube and Google who don't want scientists talking and shooting from the hip. And it got to the point where most scientists are wrapped up in things called non-disclosure agreements. And a non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, is basically a requirement for a position in science with any employer, because if you don't sign the NDA, they're not going to tell you about their work, because you could take their work and go off in another direction, and then you would be a competitor. And so you have to sign a non-competition clause, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And if you're doing significant work, you might have patents or copyrights or other things that you have to observe, because that's the way the system is set up to assess the credibility of people who've jumped through the hoops in the system. Now, YouTube, in its infinite wisdom, doesn't give a rip about who the speaker on the film is. If you're giving false information, they're going to flag you. And because the idea of what is false information in the YouTube world is quite a bit different than what is false information in the physical world, I was totally surprised to go back to one of my old prepared talks that I had given in 2014 about the chemistry behind the chemtrails. And they had this thing saying, go to Wikipedia and look up chemtrails, and this is what you're talking, this is the real information. Now, I know that Wikipedia is one of these sites where all you have to do is register with them and you can go in and change anything on their site, and they converge on the truth, but the truth is up to the body of people who come in with no credentials and just want to write on Wikipedia. And Wikipedia has their own development of credentials, and it takes nothing away from other people's way of providing credentials. But that's sort of where I was going, is if nobody has credentials and everybody's talking, how do you evaluate the credentials of the people who are talking? And right now, if somebody has 3 letters after their name, they're given God status by the non-thinking people in the world, to the point where I don't even bother using those letters anymore, nor the name, because if people want to believe based on not thinking because somebody tells them what to believe, well, that's scientism. But it's scientism in a way that impresses a bully pulpit on each one of us on this planet. And so the basis of science, you got to prove to me something is right until I can accept it. And until you have verifiable, unmistaken proof, we'll just call it a hypothesis and work with it anyway. And then if you can prove your hypothesis, but there might be exceptions, we'll call it a theory. So you've got the theory of gravity, you've got the theory of evolution, you've got a lot of theories about how people think things work, but there's no proof in that pudding. In math, you have proof. In math, if there's no proof, there's no acceptance. But you know what? Math and science are cut from the same fabric. And if you want proof in math, you can get proof. I can take about 12 steps and prove on paper that 1 equals 2. But in reality, it doesn't, even though the math proof holds. And so you start looking at sacred geometry and number theory and set theory and all sorts of things, and you find there's a lot more that's true that you can't express in a mathematical equation than there is that's false. So if you're waiting to get a mathematical equation to prove truth, and you need to have a valid mathematical proof, you're throwing way too many babies away with your bathwater. I need to pour some hotter coffee into my cup. This stuff has gotten tepid. But scientists do not know as much as athletes, and that's why athletes get paid millions of dollars and scientists get paid a pittance. It actually has to do with overproduction, and that in the 1950s and 1960s, the scientists ran everything, and they were the elite, because they had made the bombs and they bombed this Japanese place. And I don't know why people do war anymore. How would we take all the war language out of our language? Even shooting from the hip earlier didn't sound right, because I don't want to play shooting games. I'm not a first-person shooter, rack 'em up type thing. I did play Castle Wolfenstein way back in the day. I beat Castle Wolfenstein way back in the day. I was actually that addicted to video games that I spent enough time to kill that silly Hitler guy. And then you know what? After I killed him, the body opened up and a little Hitler popped out and ran away, and you had to keep going on in the game and kill him again. And so it was, okay, I get to play more and become even further addicted into the games. But the reason you go into games deep is because it's a fantasy world. And if you figure out the things that are going on in your fantasy world, then you don't have to deal with the reality, which is television's fantasy world. And television's fantasy world is apocalyptic. And I'm not quite sure what apocalyptic means, except that it gets me perplexed to the point where my eyes get watery and my ears get red and everything goes on and off, and I don't know what's going on. And so sometimes things go on in a way that I don't understand, and I just have to say, okay, do I need to reboot you, or are you going to actually pick up the station this time? And sometimes I don't know because it says it's connected on one hand and it says it's not connected on the other hand. And so if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, you have to think that you are living in a dream. And if you're living in a dream, what does that have to say about the reality that we share in common? Can we have a common group-wide delusion that we call a dream, where we're all participating in the same dream together? Dream on, dream for the year, dream for the laughter, dream for the cheer. Yeah, Aerosmith was pretty good. But that's not what we're talking about this morning. What we're talking about is the role of scientism and the belief system that the media has given us, to the point where the scientists have no respect from the people because they've been caught lying, but the athletes have total respect from the people because they can throw a football or bounce a basketball. And actors are people who play roles. We are actors in our own show right now. There is nothing we can do to get this radio show on the air when they choose to block it because they don't like what I'm saying. And yes, they've been listening, because when they listen, they can throw monkey wrenches. But if they actually take us down and don't let us speak, they know we're going to find other platforms to speak. So they have to keep the platform open. And sometimes I just don't know. I think they've got to tap into every individual computer so that no matter what you're doing, if they find that you're doing something that they don't agree with, they're going to throw a monkey wrench in. But the trick is that this stream is going live on air anyway, whether the station is running or the station is not running. And I did a couple things in the station so that I have better backup this time than I had previously. So the show must go on. The radio listeners on TuneIn now are once again hooked up. I'm Dr. Lenny Time, and I'm rambling on the terrors of scientism, because the scientists are the ones who are to blame. And they're all mad scientists, and they do things like they make poisons, and they run companies like Monsanto, which just poisons the earth and poisons the food supply. But why did we think a company that came about as a poison manufacturer would do anything other than create poisonous food for us to eat? I mean, the whole thing is silly. It's what you believe is what you get. WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And so if you WYSIWYG your life away, that's okay. You're going to get everything you expect. So let's change the playing field and expect things to work out to our benefit. And let's stop paying attention to the things that they tell us we have to pay attention to, because they really don't have any relevance. Now, there is a problem that I call rule of law. And rule of law is a serious problem because it's built on a bully pulpit of thuggery. And they make these laws and they tell us, well, we had a chance to vote for the people making the laws, so we have to follow them. Or people went to school to figure out what's going on, and they have to micromanage this portion of life so that they feel that they're justified in making it work for everybody. And this making it work for everybody based on what I say as an individual, how does that work? We're all competing to get to the top of a pyramid of hierarchy. That's a false flag right there. And I'm not talking New Zealand. The whole game of getting ahead is not getting ahead. It's of being wizard of your own domain. And if you want to be a terror in your own domain, you can be king of your own world and not have any friends at all because everybody has abandoned you because you have no concept of how to socially behave in an environment with a lot of people. And you know, the more and more we isolate from each other into our own little cubicles to get our work done, the less and less we get the social skills that we need to actually manifest things that we want to manifest. And we are all the very best manifestors in the world, and we can manifest anything that we care to dwell on. But the thing is, we care to dwell on all these negative concepts. And when we dwell on the negative concepts, we lose track that if we dwelled on the positive concepts, we'd get a lot more positive things accomplished, and we do a lot of stuff. So I'm very positive about what's going on here because we just had 8 days of rental on a tractor, and that expired today, and there's not a whole lot of background noise. So I have a quiet place to do the radio show. But the transformation of the field has been something else. And we went from a field that has been fallow for 20 years to a field that no longer has big cottonwood trees in it, and it's been sort of leveled out. There's a couple of deep holes, but those deep holes are where they're burning a lot of the excess bulk wood from the cottonwoods because it didn't really break down very well into firewood. And it would have broken down to firewood if we had a lot more people to be making firewood. But the idea of recovering the wood from the fire would have been something that we could have done as a community, but as a small group was way beyond capacity. So learning how small groups can build up to big groups from human scale, where every human has a say in what they're doing with their time, that's sort of where I envision the new way going in the future. So No Way was my blog, and no, KNOW, Weigh, WEIGH, talks about the means that if you want to know something, you measure it. And as you form the process of measuring, you learn more about teasing one variable away from another variable. And that's sort of what scientists do. But scientists don't do things right because there's no score in science. And athletes do things right because athletes get scored all the time. And it's not just about winning or losing either. I mean, you can look at a sport like the National Basketball Association, and you got guys like LeBron James and Kevin Durant, and all the athletes know that this guy's going to get his points, he's going to play the game, and you got to take care of the other 4 guys on the court because the one guy who's making all the shots, nobody's going to stop him. He's going to make all the shots, but if he makes all the shots and nobody else makes any, he can still win the game, and it's a team game. So the entire male public in the United States, well, let's not say the entire male public, because I think that the media amplifies the importance of sports, and most people have just flipped the switch and said, I don't have time for that stuff, and do other things. And how you spend your time is totally under your control until you sell it to some corporation in order to live. And that's what's wrong with the whole system, is that we have to sell our lives to make money to pay for a living that ought to be free and always was free. Not without challenge, not without difficulty, just without the need to convert resources to money, to convert the money back into resources so that the middlemen can get their cut on a system where they never belonged in the middle at all. And you look at these government scams like Obamacare in medical insurance, and the whole game with medical insurance and the fact that everybody should be covered and have equal access to the medical stuff that goes on begs the question of if the medical profession is even close to providing the services that we expect of them from the narrative that we grew up with. And I don't know why, but I get the feeling that all the academic elite professions have people who are more interested in the title of their profession than in doing the work and have no capacity for independent creative thought. And so science is stagnant because in the past 100 years, technology is buried behind paywalls and sequestered information. And we're at the point where we need to sue the university system because they're not teaching anything valid, because everything valid to teach is wrapped up under patent and copyright protection and can't be talked about. And so when Bill Clinton changed the rules and allowed college professors to sign contracts with industry that would allow them to bypass the university system became out of the loop on the information stream. And since that time, it's been downhill all the way. We get no new knowledge from the university system at this point. All we get are clones of each other trying to take the same form of thinking and put it back into the old way of thinking, which doesn't fit because they changed the old way of thinking. And so now we have ways of thinking, but each of us think differently, and there's no way that every one of us can think the same. And so when we're thinking differently and not thinking the same and coming to the same conclusions, wouldn't that edify us and make it so that we know we're on the correct path, because two different paths end up in the same place? And if we were all making it up, we wouldn't get to the same place at the same time. So that proves that there's a reality underneath the reality that we're told by the media. But everything we've been told by the media supports stuff we learned at school. And so if we're getting fake news from the media, what's to say we didn't get fake learning from the school? So we have to take everything we knew and weigh it the new way. KNEWWEIGH. Everything we knew and weigh it. And when you use words in the vocabulary that you hear are spelled differently than the words you read. And you have to realize that every word that has a misspelling is a double or triple or quadruple entendre, and that the words have meanings beyond the meanings. And one of the things we're going to do is we're going to start playing the KNEWWEIGH glossary game. And we're going to take some different words and try and define those words in terms that when we use the word, we know what we're speaking about. But it really has to be done for the whole. And too many people are down in their own separate rabbit holes to even know that whole should be spelled WHOLE and that it's all of us in this together. And the way to get everybody on the same page all together is to not have a big group of everybody. When you have big groups of everybody, you tend to get leaders who are dominant and pushy, and they push people into things that they don't want because it's the purpose of the group. And groups don't represent people, people represent groups. So if you're a member of a group, you should be able to talk on behalf of that group and support that group to the best of your ability. And so if there's somebody who is dissociative to the group, you should be able to kick their butt out. But other people want to sing Kumbaya and just have every member of the group be happy and huggable. And if you've got a member of the group disrupting things and no way of kicking them out of the group, well, the people who don't want to put up with it are going to kick themselves out of your group. And that's okay. Groups ebb and flow, and they grow and they expand, and then they shrink and they unexpand. And the whole idea of being in a group is the social acceptance of the other members of the group. So if you can't live with yourself, you don't even belong in somebody else's group. You got to figure out how to do it on your own and get control of that person who is troubled by the way things work when other people do things to yank their chain. And so I was involved in a discussion about yanking people's chains, and I got the impression that some people are just here to yank other people's chains. And that's okay. If they're here to yank other people's chains, power to them. They're going to be banned in my room because I'm not a chain yanker, and I don't like my chain yanked unless I know it's going to be yanked for a certain reason. And yanking my chain is pretty easy. All you have to do is tell me that science proves points, and now you've yanked my chain. Because science doesn't prove anything. You can't prove a negative. And so there's always a possibility that something can exist, no matter how improbable it is. And when you have a scientist telling you that the science is already decided, you know that person is living in their own reality. And when that person goes on Joe Rogan and starts talking about how all the vaccine science is all done, and anybody who doesn't support vaccines for children should not be allowed to talk about what they know because we've already decided the science and vaccines are good for children, and vaccines don't cause autism. Autism causes autism. And this guy talking with his PhD in science and his MD in medicine was totally off base, saying, I went to school, I know better, you listen to me, you idiot people. And Joe Rogan is pandering to this guy. Anytime you get somebody with a degree who's talking down to you that they know better than you have to laugh at them and not take them very seriously because they don't know jack. I don't know jack, but I do know chemistry. And I do know that in chemistry, you have to have a mechanism to get something done. And if there's no mechanism to do it, it isn't real. And there's two major mechanisms in chemistry. One is based on heat, one is based on light. And the heat mechanism and the light mechanism have completely different rules of the game. And you can imagine that if the light mechanism worked from something from the sun, and you happened to be on the earth when it rotated and you weren't looking at the sun, it would be colder than it is than if you've got the sun in the sky. And in fact, we know that the temperatures are colder at night than they are during the day. And so we don't have to worry about things like whether the temperature is cold or hot if it's day or night. We know that we're going to be putting on a jacket in the evening because it's going to get cold when the sun goes down. That's a light mechanism. If it were a heat mechanism, it would be something thermal coming from the earth to where the earth contained a temperature, and that temperature that we were experiencing from the earth, not the sun, would come from underneath, and it would be a constant temperature that rises gradually or falls gradually. Something like that might be akin to boiling a frog in a pot of water. And so as you start looking at the different analogies for the things that people are trying to do, you almost have to step back and say, oh, wait a minute. How do we even know what we're talking about? Oh, we learned it in school. But the information in school since 1992 hasn't been taught to people because it's been protected by copyrights, patents, and non-disclosure agreements. Now we're 28 years from 1992, and what do we have? We've got a whole school system that bankrupts people for the privilege of going to college so that they can get ahead in their job career. but the job career is protecting the privilege of holding a position and not having the competence to do the work that's implied by the title of the position. So you got a lot of people running around with advanced degrees who don't know anything about how things work, and you got a lot of people holding things together with baling twine and wire, and it ain't working because the people making the rules are so far out in la la land that every year you get hundreds of thousands of new rules to follow and nothing ever gets repealed. So how about an entire session of Congress where we just repeal laws instead of making new ones? And how about taking care of laws that conflict with each other so that I'm not a felon 6 times till Tuesday by the time I finish Monday each week? And why are we on a calendar that has weeks? Why don't we move to an 8-day calendar and make it a strong instead of a week? Much, much, much better. But the language that we use is the whole key to the ballgame. And if we use language that continues to bring us into a battlegrounds because all the language is militarized under this maritime law that somehow says that we're all dead and the country owns us until we show up to claim our proper us, I don't get this stuff at all. And the more I talk to people who are in the know, the more I think that the people in the know just don't talk to the people in the reality. So what we know in the reality are two different things. And that even proves my point more that school is as much fake information as television provides fake news. And so if we really want to do things in this world, we've got to determine our own credentials and not accept a college education as a credential for something. People need to take a field and demonstrate that they understand the field in order to represent themselves as a practitioner in their own field. And I can talk for the field of chemistry. And I know people who understand chemistry and people who don't understand chemistry. And people who don't understand chemistry are not going to understand some of the stuff that I can explain using chemistry because the arguments don't make sense. Now, you can apply the word chemistry to any other field that requires a college degree, and everybody has a perspective on what their field is and how it works and how they're going to do things within their field. And anybody who hasn't gone to college doesn't have to deal with that formal structure of knowledge proof that makes sure you know how the system works, but whether the system is real or Memorex is not something that they even worry about in college because they know it's all Memorex and you don't get any slice of reality. You get reinforcement of what they taught you on television and in the movies, and the whole thing has been under the control of Hollywood for so long that you don't know the actors from the real life personalities they play. And so all of a sudden, Kevin Spacey is treated like the president of the United States and brought down because he's acting a role in which he admits to being a pedophile, just so that the public has a face to scream at for 30 minutes before they forget it and move on to their next 30-minute TV show. And so one of the best actors played an actor in a role, and now he can't act in Hollywood for a few more years until he comes back in some other place. But believe me, I will never trust Kaiser Sose again. So the way it all works is the way it all works, and there's not much you have that can change the way it works. So you might as well just fire up another bowl and get with the program. That's a problem too. In too many places, it's illegal to fire up bowls and get with the program. Marijuana is not a drug. Marijuana is a weed. It's like tobacco. Tobacco is not a drug. Tobacco is a weed. The idea that we smoke weeds and they have psychoactive occurrences is no different than when we drink things and they have psychoactive occurrences. I certainly don't want to down a bottle of Jack Daniels today because I know even though I would have fun with my own reality, by tomorrow my body would be saying that was a silly thing to do. And so when we're young, we can do things like drink tequila to kill ya. And I used to be able to do tequila shots with the best of them. But it always amazed me how the 96-pound woman could drink the 250-pound linebacker under the table consistently, party after party. And the amount of alcohol that you physiologically can take up is not dependent on your matter and physical size. And that's something that you wouldn't know if you followed just what they taught you in school. But you see, humans on human scale are each quanta of energy. And a quanta is just a fixed amount that can't be measured. It's your unit of one. So whatever you are, if you are human working on human scale, one human is as small as you can be. If you want to start talking about the subcomponents of human, like your heart and your liver and that, you have to invert the microscopic to the macroscopic and realize it's a lot bigger field to go into medicine and health. But we need a lot of people going into medicine and health from human perspective, because what we've got from big pharma and the medical profession isn't healthy. And they never said they were going to be healthy. The fact that health care means medicine is just word association, and we got it wrong. Healthcare does not mean medicine. Healthcare means lining the pockets of insurance companies who wiggled their way between the patient and the doctor. When I grew up, doctors actually sometimes made house calls, although to tell you the truth, in my memory, I can't ever think of when a doctor made a house call to our house, because I don't know, I was a pretty healthy kid. I ate a lot of dirt. And I think one of the problems we have in this society is the overfunction of cleanliness. And I can see cleanliness in a hospital or something like that, and they don't do it right, and they spread MRSA and all sorts of nasty stuff. But cleanliness around your home, if you try and make everything too clean, anytime something comes in that carries any germs, you're going to get sick from the germs. And the germ theory is something they taught us in school, so it can't possibly be wrong, could it? But the whole basis of life and what we know it is based on our age, because they sort of change the story every 7 years in a rotation, so that you take your 7-year period, and by the time you're back to 7 years, they're teaching the same perspective of stuff from a skewed angle. So it goes like a clock. And every time you go through another 7-day period, it's like a quarter way along the clock face. And so it takes 28 days to get around to the same period. And that happens to be a moon cycle. So a 13-month, 28-day calendar is 364 days. And wouldn't that make a lot more sense than 30 days has September, April, June, and November? All the rest have 31, except for February, which only has 28, but sometimes has 29. I mean, how can you manufacture something more confusing for a 4-year-old? I mean, what's the game? Do we now deliberately confuse our children as soon as they wake up to reality so that they live in an altered state for the rest of their life? Unfortunately, the answer is yes, and it's been going on for so long that the capacity for critical thinking is not there in all the people who are here. And so we like to poke fun at them and call them NPCs, but they're really people here, and they have a right to live in the mindset that they've been taught to live in. And who are we to break their mindset? But that means that there has to be different qualities of human that we deal with, and we already have that, only we call it persons. And so the persons legally who are responsible for humans are corporations and not really people at all, because we've gotten too big for our britches and we no longer function on human scale. So if we can go back to human scale and rebuild the entire society from human scale, the only requirement is that all these presupposed upper scales leave us alone to do things in the way we need to do it, and not continually change the rules and tell us that we can't talk about things that we have to talk about because they're real and we have to change the way it works. Vaccines cause autism. That seems to be a major question right now. And the science community of scientismists are saying, science settled. You can't talk about this. You're just scaring people, and we have to give them another shot. So go away. And now we've got the social media taking Wikipedia, which is made up by anonymous sources, and telling people that that's a better source of information than a PhD chemist talking in his field of knowledge and giving a lecture to a group of people assembled in a library one evening. And just the idea that the criteria of the credentials is there and is enforced over and over and over in the society. And yet when somebody who has the credentials says something they don't like, immediately the credentials don't matter. So if credentials don't matter and they totally matter, I'm confused. I'm not playing that game. But in order to not play that game again, we have to shut off the switch and not be subject to any of the rules of that game. And that means that there has to be a different way of supplying me with room and board, food, and all sorts of things without me having to work for a living to earn money to buy it at a store and deal with lots of people who aren't even in my wavelength anymore because I'm not playing their game. And so I can walk into a room and talk about something, but when somebody else walks into the room and starts talking about what they saw on Teleli or television, everybody sort of goes to hear about what they know, which is what was on television, and I'm left talking to 2 or 3 people. But the conversation gets deep in a hurry, and we get things actually accomplished from the conversation as soon as all the people who've had their 5 minutes of listening to Lenny now go back to their television or their sports or their movies or whatever keeps their interest. But man, the system just keeps throwing up distraction after distraction after distraction. And if you intend to be part of the distraction, you're not looking at the real picture. Illusion is the art of distraction, and everybody is an illusionist. We create a reality for ourselves. That's the reality that we place us in. And if something goes wrong with that reality, we get upset because it's not real in the way what we thought we should be able to look at it. But then we're conditioned to continually push pins into other people's balloons and pop their bubbles and make it so that they have to conform to our reality, which is more stringent than their reality. And sometimes that's not really a fair thing to do. And so you might get an individual who hijacks the reality of another number of people to the point where the number of people shut off that reality, and what was there, the illusion dissipates and it's not there anymore. And now some people have a way of looking at things on an all-inclusive basis. And the problem is that when you include everyone and insist on including everyone, that doesn't allow people to opt out. And if you want to opt out of something, it should be your right to opt out. But you shouldn't have to leave a group of people that you like because somebody else has decided to take advantage of rules and can't be kicked out because there's no kicking when you're trying to get a group of everybody. But if you go to human scale and you're working for a group of everybody, work on yourself. It's a group of one. And if you can't handle that everybody's not going to agree with you, you got a lot more work to do in that group of one before you can start talking about everybody else. Because if I don't want to play a game, I don't have to play it. But if I want to play a game and I don't want to follow the rules and they kick me out of the game and I want to keep playing the game, I either need to conform to the rules or not conform to the rules and be consistent about it. But when the rules don't let me out of the game and I can't follow the rules, it doesn't give me very many choices on how to play with the rule book. And so the new way is taking the old rule book and saying, okay, now that I'm a single individual, competent thinking human being in a group of one, which part of this rule book do I agree with and which part do I not? And I'm going to require myself to be consistent across the board. So I can't use a rule sometimes and then use a rule not other times. If it's a rule, it's a rule. And if I break it, it's not a rule anymore. So if I break a rule, the game ends. So if the game ends, it's over. I'm either a winner or a loser. So I choose to be a winner. So every time I break a rule, the game ends and I win the game. That encourages me to break a lot of rules. But it also encourages me to have to start a lot of new games because if I'm consistently breaking a rule, why have that rule there in the first place? Because it doesn't work, because I'll break it willy-nilly. But, if you don't even recognize that there are rules for certain things, you don't have to pay attention to the rules. And if everybody else is paying attention to rules that you're not paying attention to, and you just go and get something done, what you find is they get mad at you for breaking the rules, even though you accomplished something that needed to be done. And that's ridiculous. And when I get to people who get more upset about not following the rules than getting things done, I just sort of click their off switch and walk away. And I don't walk back. Once people try and put me under constraints and I break through those constraints, going back into the constraints is never one of my things. And so sometimes there are these people who are really into stuff like S&M and they want to be restrained. And I think, wow, I don't know. I can't get there. But, sometimes there's just people who are begging for abuse from their behaviors. And if you're as sarcastic as I am about the whole thing, sometimes verbally you can get into dishing out some of their own behaviors to them. And you find out where they're really coming from. And then you can sort of figure it all out. But as a single individual, I have a relationship with every other individual that I've talked to in a one-on-one circumstance. And to me, those individual relationships, groups of 2 and 3 people, are way more important on human scale than the groups of people collected as clubs and bully pulpits in the modern society. Anytime you're paying dues to an organization to represent you, how much representation do you actually have within the organization? And unless you're playing the game full and actually participating in the organization where you've rolled up your sleeves and 10% of your time you're doing something with that group of people, you really don't have a vested interest in being a member of the group. But like this show, when we have 10 to 15 people in the chat room, all at the same time, coming in, coming out, making comments, listening to what's said on the air, coming up with memes and different ways of making fun of the speakers or of the concepts or of what we're doing, we're pushing the envelope on what group theory is about. And as groups expand, groups contract. And so the size of the group makes all the difference in the world about the effectiveness of the group if the group of people can be set to the same goal by the purpose of the group. So group theory from human scale is a lot different from group theory from society scale. And we have two ones in the Fibonacci sequence. One is the individual, one is the whole. So everybody is a member of the whole who is part of the human species and can look at their hands and see that they have opposable thumbs. And that takes out about 40% of our listenership, because both Tripod and Einstein are here this morning and neither one of them count. Tilly doesn't count. Golden Wizard doesn't count. Even the geese don't count when we're talking about only human person. But when we're talking about stewards of a living earth, where everything, including the planet, is alive, those non-speaking persons who don't qualify as humans but are still part of our group absolutely need our representation as part of the group to make sure they get clean air, clean water, good food, and all that sort of stuff. So it forms the basis for why there is environmentalism and a green movement. It does not take the current green movement, which is as much about the color green of money as it is the color green of environmental affairs, and frame it in a way where the idea is that if you're looking through a different color at what you're seeing, it changes the vision of what you're looking at and perhaps can change your perspective. So if we take 6 primary colors, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet, or purple, and make those 6 colors each into a category of its own and call it a different perspective, we can create a rainbow effect that allows us to look at things with 6 perspectives instead of just our individual one perspective. And maybe something from one of those 6 other perspectives looks a bit different so that we can get a handle on what's going on. And we're not in our group of 1, which is a spherical ball, but we're beyond the tetrahedron and not quite in a cube. 6 is a funny number because 6 isn't a real number. We can kick that 6 to 8 by creating black and white also. So we have 6 colors, black and white. Now we're working with 8. And 8 is a Fibonacci number, so we're much better working at 8 than we are working at 6, which isn't a real number. But when you're dealing with numbers, every number needs to be plus or minus 1, just for allowing for error. And plus or minus 1, when you're at 1, is anywhere from 0 to 2, and that's a huge range, especially when there's 2 ones. And so you can go from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 and work from your individual to your complete everything that you're in contact with on whatever your higher self deals with. And then you can go back to the one on the individual level, and then you can go back to the one on the higher self level. And what you find is that you can spend all your time on one without ever having another person to deal with. And if you don't have that other person to deal with, you can really see where you sit in the world. And then dealing with a second person is growing to 2, having a conversation. And most of the time, the 2 break up and go back to 1. And you spend more time going from 1 to 1 to 1 to 1. But every so often, the 2 people end up in a prolonged conversation or add a third person. and a third person's perspective changes the dynamic of a group of 2 to a group of 3 and is way, way more valuable in breaking us out of groupthink. But groupthink of a group of 3 has 3 different perspectives, and 3 different perspectives is enough to triangulate on something, so that works. A group of 4 doesn't work any better than a group of 3, but a group of 5 changes the dynamics again. And when you have a group of 5, the dynamics of 5 people working together allow for enough different viewpoints that 5 people can cover all 360 degrees of the circle. And so if you have 5 core people participating in a group, you can reset the level of that group to 1 and call it a first level human group. Or you can keep it as 5 individual people working in a 0th level human group, which is that every human within the group has say. But if that group of 5 goes up to a group of 8, for every person in a group of 8 to have equal say means they would have 12.5% of the say. And if you have to have 10% of your interest time spent in a group in order to make it worth your effort as a life skill to get paid or have say within that domain, let's say, then it starts getting real tough because you can't participate in a group of 13 and have 10% of the effort and have it all go. And so I felt back, a couple months ago that Flame had hit a point where there were 13 people on the same page, all together, working for the same outcome. And I started a new game called The New Way to take what we had built in Flame and see if I could expand it to a bigger core group than 13 people working on the same page. And what I have found in my analysis is that when you go to expand from 13 to 21, you need to absolutely have several people to be the leaders, because otherwise the group doesn't have anybody taking more than 10% of the effort input output set and putting it in. And if nobody's giving the more than 10% or getting that sort of control, it falls apart because there's no cohesion within the group. And so what you get is you get a group of people that can talk to each other, and you have new group of people that come in, and the new group of people have to work their way into the old cohesive set, and there's a change in the dynamics of the people coming and going. And it's no problem for anybody. There's always change in dynamics. But the idea of having to include everybody when there are people who drive away other people by their inclusion just makes it impossible to even think about the concept of everybody being a concept that we can ever attain, because as long as one person can throw a wrench and say, I don't wish to play by your rules, and you include them and they don't play by the rules, they've broken the game. And so if we want to play in broken games to repair them, we can just have another iteration of the same game, call it fixed, change the starting conditions of the rules to make it so that to get into the group in the first place, you have to at least have some credentials. But what the credentials for being a member of the group are never really explained. And the inner circle is one that has formed because there's a sense of energy within the group that keeps it mellow and makes it a comfortable place for everybody to be. But when older people who are part of the group shift away and newer people with different energy dynamics come in, the rules that the group has set to keep the balance of the older people have to have a way of being modified to accommodate the newer people without forcing the paradigm. And that's a problem because once we get into a place of comfort, we don't force the paradigm. But when that place disappears, we lose the understanding of the ability of how to force a paradigm to make it into a place of comfort. And the thing is, we don't work properly if we're always 100% in a place of comfort. What we need to do sometimes is come out of that place of comfort and have a challenge that pushes us beyond the capacity of where we thought we were because we want to accomplish a task. And the accomplishment of the task is more important than the quality of perfection that we might call upon ourselves to do a lot of tasks. Because when you step into the unknown and you try and do something without presupposing what your results are, sometimes the results turn out to be quite a bit different than what you expected going in. And so a lot of times it's worth having a protocol and having your protocol be something that you can work again and again and again in the same way and let things happen differently. And when you see that things happen differently and that you're in a position where you can see a different outcome from the same set of starting points, now you've made an advance. But if you're only doing things 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 times, you're not going to see that. N. N is a number, and N is used to represent the number of trials that it takes in an experiment before you can get statistical significance from that experiment. And if you're doing an experiment that has significant cost, your N has to be small because it costs too much to do the experiment a lot. And so you tend to do partitions of the experiment and work in a different place and do things in a way that they don't cost a lot, and you can get a lot of information on your variables and work the variables to the point where you understand the dynamic relationship of those variables so that when it's time to spend the money and do the test for real, you have already worked out which variables are important and which variables aren't really important so that you can run the test, do the experiment that you're doing, collect the data, and then after the experiment is over, go back, interpret the data from what you learned, and design the next series of experiments to see where the data took you and go back in order to make sure that you have the mechanism of getting from there to here. And as I said earlier, as a chemist, it's important to create a mechanism for getting from here to there, at least to me, who's a molecular theorist. A molecular theorist is one who can envision where the molecules go and sort of see them in space so that I can tell you which carbons are bonded to carbons and which ones are bonded to hydrogens and nitrogens and oxygens. And coming down the road, the new way is going to play a chemistry game so that everybody can figure out what it is I'm talking about when I get into some of the deeper chemistry, because I realize that some people have never taken a chemistry course. Some people last had chemistry in high school. Some people don't know a thing about chemistry and don't care about it because it ain't real. And it really isn't real. But I've got this theory that humans are like water molecules, and individual water molecules have three modes of vibration. They have two stretches, a symmetric stretch where the hydrogens go out and the hydrogens come in. They have an asymmetric stretch, which is like if you're a cheerleader going to the left or the right with your arm and bringing the other one to your chest. So that's an asymmetric stretch when your arms work differently, symmetric stretch when they work together, and then there's a twist so that the angle between your two arms and your midpoint in your body changes. And those are 3 degrees of freedom. And so every water molecule has those 3 degrees of freedom, and 3 degrees of freedom is enough to establish a unique identity, but not much beyond that. But water has this way of finding a second water molecule and making a team of water molecules. And now the central oxygen in a team of water molecules each have 4 hydrogens that are surrounding them, not 2. So instead of H2O, you've got H4O2. And now you've got a tetrahedral shape instead of a bent molecule. And there's a lot more varied modes of vibration within that water molecule. And so Gerald Pollack at the University of Washington wrote a book, The Fourth Phase of Water, in which he talked about exclusion zones made up of water molecules that had no ions in them and no dissolved solids and no organic molecules. It was just water interacting with water, and he demonstrated intelligence at that level. So if there's intelligence at the level of water, and we are 70% water, I'm sorry, the game is over. The idea that we think with our brains and our guts and our hearts ain't so. We think with our water. And if we think with our water, what's to say that Einstein and Tripod don't think with their water? And since it's the same water, why can't they have the same consciousness as I do? For that matter, why can't trees and flowers have that same consciousness? And even rocks and minerals, because those rocks and minerals contain water. It's just that they've got more proportion of other things than they do to water. So if water is really the mechanism of life and carbon is just the scaffolding, then everything we teach about science in the university system, about life science in the university system, needs to go back to nature and start all over again, pre-Darwin, because evolution ain't going to cut it at a molecular level. The connection between the chemistry and the biochemistry is an area of fuzziness. And as a chemist, I realize that biology can't work the way it does. And as a biologist, I realize that chemistry can't work the way it does. But I'm not a biologist, I'm a chemist, and I have a perspective through chemistry. And so then when people can teach me that chemistry doesn't work the way they taught me it worked, I like that, because I have to be able to criticize chemistry from a point of fact, and I can work it through the point of theory, no problem. The theory of chemistry is like the theory of doing a New York Times crossword puzzle on Sunday morning. You wake up, the Times is there, it's a huge, thick newspaper, maybe 3 or 4 inches. And on Sundays, it's that thick because it's all full of ads. And there's the magazine, and in the magazine, there's the crossword puzzle. And in the crossword puzzle, there's usually 2 crossword puzzles. There's a standard traditional crossword puzzle where they give you clues and you fill in the downs and the ups and go across or side to side in that. And then there's the other crossword puzzle that's more an anagram, where you have some clues, and when you get the answers in the clues, you put the letters in the anagram and you try and figure things out. And I was always really, really good at doing New York Times crossword puzzles, but I could only get about 60% of the puzzle done. And there were things that I just didn't know. And you can work your way back and forth in a crossword puzzle once you have some letters to sound out words and things. But once I was done with the puzzle and put it down, somebody else would come and pick up the puzzle. And if I went back a couple hours later, sometimes if Dad got a hold of it, he'd have a lot of things that I didn't know filled in, and we could eventually get it to the point where there were only one or two squares in the puzzle that we didn't know. And you'd have to wait till next week until they publish the results of this week's puzzle. But that was when I was a child and doing New York Times crossword puzzles. I reached a point where I realized there was really no satisfaction in doing New York Times crossword puzzles, because even though I learned a lot of things about the world by learning the language and trying to fit it into crossword puzzles, there were other things to do and bigger fish to fry. So now I play a game on my tablet called Words with Friends. And Words with Friends is like creating your own crossword puzzles. And I just have to look at it and say, did I manufacture this from my past, or is this something that came about organically from things that went on? And I kind of think that as a game designer who's always looking for a new game, that what I've done is I've kicked out enough new games in my notebook that some of the games that I've written down in the notebooks of past have manifest from the morphic field as ideas in other people's reality. And that if those ideas in other people's reality can be masked because I created them in my morphic field, then we've got a new way of doing things that's a little bit beyond the illusion that we talked about previously. And so I've got a construct set up, and when I started crunching the numbers of my construct, I find that of the 34 people that I consider the group, I can break it into a group of 21 and a group of 13 fairly easily. And the group of 13 I call Flame, because Flame as a group of 13 is what triggered the game of existence, my one-player game, to end, which made me play a two-player game. And the two-player game got to the point where I had enough people playing two-player games that I could branch into three-player games. But 1, 1, 2, and 3 are 4 different levels of games. And there's 2 ones in Fibonacci, so you have to take it as a game of self and a game of whole. And the game of existence was getting the self and the whole organized to the point where the self as an individual had to go and deal with something greater than a self in the whole. And at that point, I declared the game won and stopped playing that game. And by stopping playing that game, it opened so much free time in my world and different perspectives on looking at things that I created a new way instead of going back to the old way that I didn't understand, because I left the world in 1992 and I significantly left the world in 2007. And when I came back to the world that I had left in 2007 and 2015, I didn't recognize it anymore. And so to me, it was my personal Mandela effect taking place in reality at that time. And that was before they had the term Mandela effect. So what was going on was something that I didn't understand, but I knew that there were some people who understood me and most people who would say, well, why don't you just go get a job and earn some money? But the problem with a job is that no matter what job you have, you're always just over broke. and that it's the means of controlling your time that's important, and that I needed to control my own time 100% from human scale before I was ready to deal with groups that could demand my time from me without compensating me for the use of that time. Well, I haven't had compensation for the work I do probably since 2003 or 2004. I have at times picked up individual jobs under personal services contracts and gotten paid in money. But once I decided that I wasn't going to accept 1099 forms, it made it tough for companies to hire me without a 1099 because they have to report to the IRS, and I'm not interested in reporting to a company that does not have any legal jurisdiction at all, but is a thug organization to steal money from me because I am a human and they consider humans their entire domain. But the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor do they have any reserves on hand. And one of the reasons they're shutting down the internet is because the internet discourse, not the internet. They're shutting down the discourse because we've read through all the topics and there's enough of us to triangulate on how things, and the whole thing is a major scam. And so if we can't come back to human level and build something new from bottom up, we're not going to get anywhere, because everything that we can do from top down is controlled in such a way that you can't get out from underneath the pyramid. So we have to take the pyramid and put the point, the capstone, into the ground and make it so that the base of the pyramid is on top of the pyramid. But there's a minor problem with that too, and it's called greed. And as long as individual greed exists, we have some problems with our conception of how to deal with each other. So my concept is, I am you and you are me and we are all together. See how they run like pigs from a gun? See how they run. I'm crying. Nah, that's not quite the Beatles song that I want. Picture yourself on a boat, on a river, with tangerine lakes and marmalade skies. Somebody calls you. You answer quite slowly. A girl with kaleidoscope eyes. Red River taxis appear on the shore, coming to take you away. Look for the girl with the sun in her eyes, but she's gone. Nah, that's not a good song either. All that wants takes me to is makes me want to do a hit of acid. Lucy in the Skies with Diamonds, LSD, the whole idea of changing the culture to have a new experience to get people out of the experience of controlling their own lives and into the realm of fantasy play so that the controllers of our lives could keep control in the forms that they wanted to take control over. But there's a problem here with this game. And the problem is that we forgot about the terms of apprenticeship. It used to be that if you had a position where your work was respected, part of the respect of your work was training somebody to take on your work when you were done with it, so that that work continued on and was being handled at an appropriate master level. But nowadays, the whole education system doesn't do that. And who gets to do the work has more to do with who's most compliant than who's most capable. And if we're working under a meritocracy, It takes hiding the merit of what you're doing, just like if you were a hippie back in the day and you wanted a job, you had to hide your hair. Because if you had long hair, you weren't going to get a job if you were male. And so you'd figure out ways to wear your hair in your hat or in other places. And signs, signs, everywhere there's signs. Blowing your mind, setting the rules, telling you how you had to do things. But you have to have rules, don't you? Because if you don't have rules, there's nothing to break. And if you're not breaking the rules, what's wrong with you? But while rules are made to be broken, if you end the game every time a rule breaks, you find that you have very, very short games because the rules are always broken. So I'm working on different forms of games with different forms of rules. And I've been looking at Snakes and Ladders and several other different games in order to incorporate rules that are appropriate to scale. And right now, I'm finishing a game that's on a scale of 8 by 8, which makes it a game of a grid of 64. And this is 62 and 64 of the KNEWWEIGH radio show. And the next game that I want to do, that's a new game in the lines of the KNEWWEIGH radio show, is going to be on a grid of 256. And I don't have the wherewithal to go from a group of 64 to a group of 256 quite yet. But I did notice that my 64 took place in a set of 91, because 91 days between solstice and equinox, and I'm going to get exactly 64 shows in the 91 days, which just is one of those mathematical disrealities. And when things work out so well in mathematical disreality, I have to step back and look at it all and say, okay, I did something right. So the benefits of the show took 2 jumps in the kinetic scheme rather than 1 jump in the scheme. And so now I'm sitting here looking at it saying 2 step forward, 1 step back. And I need to step back a bit because I'm in overload mode and it's coming to where the winter has ended. We're into the spring. But I have a plate that has so much on it that the main course has filled me up to the point where I don't want dessert. And that's not good because I've got a really good dessert planned. So overeating is never the way to go with something. Stepping back and letting it air time is worthwhile. There's a reason you pull the cork from a bottle of red wine an hour before you want to drink the wine. And it has to do with oxidation and reduction. Those chemistry things that nobody understands because they're too simple for our complex understanding. And if we can get a group of second graders who want to really, really learn how chemistry works, I'd love to dive into second grade chemistry class with a bunch of retired older folks and a bunch of second graders. And I would bet that we would have more fun than humanly possible. And within a school term, those kids would be wizards at chemistry to the point where when they got to high school, they could be writing their own patents in chemistry. And that's necessary because chemistry has been controlled by industry, and the information that people need to understand chemistry isn't out there to the general public in any way, shape, or form that makes any sense. So the general public believes in chemistry because it's a science, and we have to believe in science without understanding it because that's what the whole world is based on. And now we have scientists out there telling people that the science is settled and they know what's going on. And the people are believing them because it's the model we've been force-fed from the school system. The more you know, the less you know. And it's not that you know any less. It's just that the level of complication gets deeper at every fractal, and you can only go so deep. And you have to realize that at any given time, you're always in two ones, the individual one and the one of the whole. And I talk come together in order to be different. But once you add something to the human morphogenic field, you can't subtract it from the human morphogenic. And therefore, once somebody comes up with an idea, everybody will get the idea of the idea properly eventually. So when you set off something at a new scale, you almost have to treat it as though it's a bird and let it free. And no matter how much you've grown something into something else, there comes a time when it takes a life of its own and has to be set as a free bird, because birds are never happy in cages. And we have all sorts of examples of using canaries in coal mines to tell us that things are going to happen. And right now, all the birds are singing loudly. So I think that the world is going to change, and it's going to change for the much better. But it's going to change so drastically that people are not going to be able to handle the change very easily on a human scale level. And so, from human scale, what I see us doing is finding more of a ground state and a resonance state where we can evolve the truths that we plan to believe in the future, because the truths that we're given now and the reality that we're given now just doesn't seem to be true or real. And so you look at what's taking place, and they tell us that there was a huge incident in New Zealand that took place. And I have a buddy from New Zealand. His name is Vinny. And Vinny has a radio talk show. And Vinny was on the air live on Saturday talking about what was going on from New Zealand, in New Zealand, with a guy named Ole something, who was from Great Britain. No, he was from somewhere in Europe. And I don't remember what Ole's name was, something long, something European. And when I reached the point where I was really into it, Ustream cut the channel and they just turned it off. And then later on, Vinny came back on and talked about what had happened. And he was like, now, if the government's going to cut me off for talking about current events, I got some real problem as a newscaster. And he's right. He does have some real problems. But they filmed this live over the internet on Facebook as it was happening, and then made it a crime for anybody in New Zealand to possess the film of the event that they might have captured. Something's going on here, and it ain't pretty. I have no idea on how things work, but I do know that when they stop allowing the free exchange of information between individual people, it means that they've got something that they're going to try and shove down our throats. And I don't think we can at all be comfortable with this type of setup. It's an information age, but when one side has all the information and has painted it into a picture that is so different from the reality that we live in, that we no longer recognize anything going on in the picture, it's incumbent on us to say, whoa, and change the game. So the new way is a game. It's just about done in its first stage, which doesn't mean we're going to stop playing the game. It just means that as a participant embedded in the game, I'm going to change my status and become a third-person observer of the game while remaining embedded in the game for a short time, but extracting myself so I can go on to designing new and bigger games. But you see, part of the game requires a host who knows what's going on and can deal with different situations on the fly and say, oh, that was nice, and continue on with what they're doing. So back when I first started, it must have been a year. Yeah, it was back in 2016. That's a while. 2016, 2017. By 2017, I had figured out that working in a social network was going to be something that I needed to figure out again. And so I started blogging. I found Steam on the internet and the Steam blockchain, and I found a fellow named Frank Bacon. And Frank Bacon is a fictional character that comes from crypto space and changes everything for everybody without changing anything for anybody. And the fact that he gets blamed for all the shit that he gets blamed for is hilarious, because all he is a big attention hog. And if you really read what he's not saying anything different than the models he's using for his own crypto fiction. And so I think we're doing crypto fiction better than Bacon. And so he wants us to be Bacon. And so we're going to go into some bacon, lettuce, and tomato stuff. But first, a puff with our sponsor. This is The New Way on Steampunk Radio. I'm Dr. Lenny Time. You're listening to The New Way, 7 till 9 Pacific Time, which is 10 till noon Eastern Time, and currently 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock European Time, depending on which nation in Europe we happen to be in. But we are looking to expand our audience and expand our mentality and expand our grasp of reality, because somehow we seem to have lost that grasp as a collective unit. And so the game is being played now to pit side A against side B in such a way that if you're not with us, you're against us. And where we go one, we go all. I tell you what, where we go one, and we don't want everybody all there, because we need our separate space to be one. And if we have to always be all and can't be one, that doesn't work. But as a member of the all and a member of the one, the all has to consider what each of the ones want. And that's where we're having problems on human scale, is that the imposition of desire from certain humans has taken the point where other humans are tired of it. But the rules of the game are set that no matter how tired of it you are, you still have to play by the rules of the game as set, unless you are in a power position, in which case you can violate the rules and get away with it because you have the power to do that. I just seem to think that everybody is in the power position, and anytime you don't want to play a game by the rules of the game, don't play the game. But when you drop out of the game and you don't play it, you can't go back and partially play it. And it's one of those things that is interesting to watch people on the yo-yo of, I'm not going to play, I quit. 2 days later, they're back and they're playing again. And then 4 days after that, I'm not going to play, I quit. And then 2 days later, they're back again. And it's like they can't decide if they're going to quit or they're not going to quit. but then the system doesn't play fair either. And sometimes when you quit the system, you have to go back to the system because the system doesn't play fair. And what you need to survive is no longer available to you in order for survival. But the biggest question I have with the medical care is, if we don't believe in the medical care system and it's one size fits all and we're forced to use it and pay for it, how do we draw benefit from it? And so I wouldn't go see a doctor unless it was to set a broken arm or deal with something that I was beyond my capacity to deal with. But most of the time, anything that is done that would cause trauma really can be dealt with by a cool-headed second person. Now, I had a friend who was really, really skilled in a lot of things, put a shiv through his artery in his leg and pass away because he was doing things alone, because he always did things alone, and he didn't realize how quickly you could bleed out from a mistake, and he bled out from a mistake. And I talked with his spirit afterwards, and he's not a happy camper, never was a happy camper, but was misinterpreted in what he was doing, so that he's in a place where in my reality he did what he did, but in his reality he didn't. He's still walking and doing his things. He has ascended. And in my reality, the ascension hasn't come, but I understand him in his reality to the point where I was walking out the other day and I could sense that he was there. And there's a lot of things going on the land right now here that's changing the dynamics of the landscape. And I think the land is trying to tell me a story of how to modify some of my visions to be able to make a quantum jump of reality that takes us from the reality that we are currently in, which was based on Earth going into Armageddon and having a social crisis that required the leadership to take control and depopulate the Earth. And that's over. That's gone. We don't have a chance of that. But since that was the setup of the past to get to the reality that was set up for us, and that reality is gone, we're in a period of time where we're treading water, and it's acting like Groundhog's Day, where you're the Bill Murray character and you wake up and every day looks like every other day. And sure, there was a shooting in New Zealand. Tomorrow it's going to be in Canada, and yesterday it was in Pittsburgh. Every day there's another shooting, and if they tend to amplify just the effects of the horror of the shooting, there's a whole contingency of people here on this earth who believe in that. But then there's another contingency of people who are having trouble reconciling the past that they remember with the past that seems to be the current reality in the morphogenic sphere of all the people on the current earth. And so I'm pretty sure that there are several different morphogenic spheres of human that are separated by different time constants, but functioning in the same reality on different time constants because we're working at the same fractal. And if it's the same fractal, the mathematics will work the same no matter where it starts from. And so if the fractal that we're on is governed by Fibonacci, and Fibonacci counts 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144. 12 steps into the Fibonacci game, you're at 144. 12 steps into the linear game, you're at 12. Which game has more options? So now I've noticed that in the Fibonacci game, from the new way, we moved from the status of a game that ended level 1 when it reached 13 to a point where I thought we would end level 2 by reaching 21. But in fact, we blew through that and reached 34. And so by reaching 34 within the presence of the game and taking 2 steps of jump, I'm going to need to back the game down from 34 scale to 21 scale just in order to be able to get there from here, because adjacent scales have to be 50% self-similar, but non-adjacent scales only have a 25% self-similarity requirement if there's one scale in between. And there is one scale between 13 and 34. And so if I only have a 25% self-similarity requirement, I need to figure out the changes that need to be made to the game that I was figuring worked on a 50% self-similarity. So I got some homework to do. I got to sit down with my game theory and my group theory and put it together. And the best way to do that is to continue collecting data on the current game and running it through so that the game never ends. This is the song that never ends, and it goes on and on. No, I'm not going to do that. We could do that way too easily. So, this is the New Way on Steampunk Radio. We've got about 15 minutes left in the show. If there's anybody in the chat room who'd like to bring anything up, this could be a good time to talk about a new topic, because an hour and 45-minute monologue was a pretty good monologue, but I have gotten beyond the drift of what I had to say. Now, having taken,
Just want to say thank you, lady. That was great.
let's fire up the bowl. And that works too. So now I can jump off to YouTube and go get some cloud therapy. And for those of you who are not aware but might be interested, the cloud therapy from Disintegral's channel on YouTube is live streaming the New Way today. And so everybody on that live stream has had the benefit of listening to Dr. Lenny ramble all through places where Dr. Lenny's ramble might make sense to some people, but I think that the only person in the world who can follow Dr. Lenny through an entire ramble is Cat, because Cat knows everything. Cat's not even here right now, and so some things happen and some things don't. And as soon as I say Cat isn't here right now, Tripod walks in the door, because he heard that I needed a kitty. Now, Tripod is an interesting kitty. He's named Tripod because there was a while he was on 3 legs after an attack from Izzy the Wonder Dog. But he's also previously had the name Death Wish, and that's because he not only attacked Izzy the Wonder Dog, who's a 65-pound pit bull, and attacked him full claws on the nose twice, but he also decided to play dodge him with a scythe that was cutting grass in a field. And I don't know, a small kitty playing with a scythe, that I could see 2 half kitties, and neither one of them would be alive. So you look at the animal kingdom and you realize that sometimes these animals have a way about them where they know more than we know. And I got to thinking that humans can swing a scythe at a certain rate. And if cats have like 5 seconds within our second to actually act, then they can easily move out of the way of a swinging scythe without us even having to worry about it. And so the only time a kitty would actually get hit by a scythe is in a world where the kitty intended to get hit by the scythe. But most kitties do not intend to get hit by scythes. And so, fortunately, I was not the person operating the scythe. And when I figured it out, I talked to the kitty and he quit playing with scythes. And now he's a couple years old. And the fact that he's made it through the first year was real important. I knew that when I was getting kitties for the farm from having a previous farm, that if I got 2 kitties, I always ended up with 1 kitty. So this year I was smart and I got 3 kitties because I wanted to end up with 2 kitties. And it was funny because the one kitty had his interaction with Izzy the Wonder Dog, and we weren't sure he was going to live, but then he pulled out of it and one of the other kitties took off. So you can't really tell. The kitties know exactly what the humans need, but they don't really care. And because the kitties don't care about the humans, but they do care because they know that kitties need to rule humans in such a way that humans think they're always on top of the game. And that if the human, wow, isn't that cool? Tripod is now on my lap trying to be in the show. You got your show credits, Tripod, for sure, for sure. It's one of those things where once the animals learn that they're working for show credits, they have no idea what a show credit is, but they want them. And I watched with Golden Wizard and with Tripod and with Einstein that there seems to be a need to participate at the crucial time to let me as a human know that they are here and playing in my game. And even though they're not of much concern to the game, they really are, because the psychology of animals seems to be the same as the psychology of humans. And if water is actually the carrier of consciousness, there's no reason why in the holographic illusion that we're dealing with, kitties on kitty scale think they're human, and when they go to check, they have opposable thumbs. But humans can't recognize humans on any other scale because they don't have a way of understanding that it's the human scale that's the variable and that the rest of the world is constant, but it's constant in a fractal reality. So whatever scale you're working on, whatever you define your quantum of energy as, that's the scale that is available for you to carry out things. So by making a human variable along the timelines, we can think of very, very small humans having extremely short lifetimes and very, very large humans having extremely long lifetimes, but every human lifetime being normalized out to 80 years. So that once you've got the 80 years of you being you on your lifetime, you pass away, reincarnate, and start another 80-year cycle. But this reincarnation is not quite right either, because now that I've experienced enough deaths to tell me that death is not a dying experience, I seem to be coming back in the same avatar instead of switching avatars. So I'm not being regenerated so much as I'm being reconceptualized. So we need a new set of terminology for reality in the hologram that is different from the reality that we had pre-2012, before we actually understood that reality takes place on many different dimensional levels. And this whole idea of what a fractal is hard for people to get because they get misinformed and get a different impression of how things work than the expression of how it seems to work. So I'm going to try in the last 5 minutes to give it one more try at an explanation. At any different level, You have a water-based being that thinks it's the only one of itself in existence, but can also see a community of others that are extremely self-like. So the morphic field is the group of the all, and the individual is the group of the one, and the all and the one are two different ones in Walter Russell's universal field. And so once you've got both of those ones mastered, and grow to 2, you've got a change in dynamics. Grow to 3, you've got a change in dynamics. From 3 to 4, the dynamics pretty much stay the same, but by 5, you have another change in dynamics. The Fibonacci 5 is the same amount of work as the linear 5, and you get to the same place in the same time frame. And so for the first 5 levels of the depth of the illusion, nothing changes visibly or invisibly, except maybe you've got an extra 1 instead of a 4 in the count. And that's trivial. If you reset and always stay in those small numbers, you're always working in dynamic systems. But as you grow to bigger numbers, you have some systems that the dynamics require something else to happen after a setup. And so you no longer are still at 1 for the massing of things or 1 for the forming of things. You're now up to 2 for the flow of things. And so when things start to flow with 2 people working and getting things together, it's more than the capacity of either of the individuals. And so you almost get 2.5 out of your 2 people. By the time you get a third person to help, the triangulation on what's going on is so focused that you can make a jump in significance really, really quickly. And so going from flow to power at 3, you've got this power that just gives you a feel that you can do something. By moving from 3 to 5, you move from power to love, and now you've got something powerful. But if you don't really learn to use it right, you can do a lot of damage. And so you take your love and you apply it to the power, and you figure things out. Now you need to reason them out, so you sound them in form as you get up to 8. You get more people going to 13, where we're putting our minds together to figure things out. And then we get to the stage of 21, and we hit a void place where, okay, we can do a whole lot of things with this. Let's get a handle on it. Let's reset it, go back to 1, and start it again. But the reset point really is at 8. And if you reset at 8, then 8 becomes 1, 13 becomes 1, 21 becomes 2, 34 becomes 3, and all we've done in the new way is move from 1 to 3. That's not a bad place to move either, but I was set up on a 1 to 2 jump, not a 1 to 3 jump, and so I'm just going to jump for joy because we are farther along in what we're trying to do than I ever expected for the amount of time that we were trying to do it in. So I've been playing with numbers and looking at things, but I have a rule to my games that if I'm a player in the game, I can't take the scientist point of view and be an outside observer while I'm in the game. And I also can't be, I can't, from an outside observer point, suddenly break into a game and try and be a player when I'm not playing that particular game. And so the New Way game has 2 more shows to go. Tomorrow we'll have Mel reading from Manly Hall. On Wednesday, I'm still trying to verify my guest, but it's going to be one of those knock your socks off type of deals. And if it's not, well, that's okay. You got to try something if you're in a position where you can try something. So this is the New Way on Steampunk Radio. I'm Dr. Lenny Time, and we are just approaching the 9 o'clock hour. And following me here on Steampunk Radio, you have Alex Jones. And I don't think I have ever listened to Alex Jones after I've been through with this set. And so I'm going to continue my record of never having listened to Alex Jones on Steampunk Radio by not listening to Alex Jones after this show. So tune in tomorrow. Our topic will be Secret Teachings of All the Ages by Manly P. Hall. And we will be doing our 9th rendition of storytelling